Kansas plays Missouri this week. It's a pretty big deal. It's a very big rivalry with historic backgrounds. We're going to explain the history, the past game history. Also get into some of the latest with Lance Leipold, the recent depth chart and comments from him leading into game week between Kansas and Missouri.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. And on today's edition, we're explaining the Kansas-Missouri rivalry. We're going to get into the history of the game as well as the history to leading up to, because for a lot of people not from the area probably don't really know, and I was one of those people, about kind of the history that led up to it. And honestly, like once you get into it, probably one of the best rivalries there is in sports. I just don't know that it gets up that same publication nationally. It should. We're going to get into the importance of the game as well for the Lance Leipold era, Jalon Daniels, KU in general. And then we'll get to some of the latest news and what was happening in the week 2 press conference for Lance Leipold and company. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets or your week 2 bets right now with FanDuel. Okay, so Kansas and Missouri, I obviously am not, from originally Kansas or Missouri. I came from out of state, and you start to learn more about kind of the rivalry because maybe you don't know it. It's not the thing about the rivalries of Auburn and Alabama and Michigan and Ohio State and Texas and Oklahoma and stuff. Those schools are always like really good at football. They're blue bloods, or I don't know, whatever. If you don't want to say Auburn's a blue or whatever, don't need to get into that conversation. They're usually well known. So not only do you get these good rivalry matchups and good games, you have programs that have meant a lot to the sport. Well, with Kansas and Missouri, these aren't teams that are consistently, playing for national titles or winning BCS bowl games every year. So from that standpoint, it doesn't get as much national love as it should, because from just a pure hate perspective, from just a pure like rivalry perspective, this is about as high up as you can get to, because there are real historical reasons as to why that is the case. And so the history here is basically this. And again, I never took Kansas history growing up and stuff. You can read way more about this online and talk to other people who are way more knowledgeable about this than me. But basically how it has been transferred to me, an out-of-stater, is that essentially, this goes back to Civil War days, right? And basically before the Civil War started, Kansas was being added as a new state. And so as part of it, it was going to potentially shift the power of, pro-slavery, anti-slavery. And Kansas was basically going to allow it to be decided by the people. And to that notion, if Kansas was going to, with their 2 representatives, basically, be a anti-slave state, a free state, so to speak, that it would unbalance the power from a national perspective, right? Versus you had, from a national perspective, obviously there were many people, this is why we fought a whole civil war about this, right? Who wanted it to be pro-slavery. And from that perspective, Missouri was a pro-slave state and wanted Kansas to be the pro-slave state so that the power in a federal level would be leaning toward the side of pro-slavery. So basically you end up with this back and forth of battles and conflict between Kansas and Missouri at the border. There was a lot that went on in Olathe. There was stuff that went on in Lawrence. Essentially, you had people from Missouri coming over to the state of Kansas to try to vote for pro-slavery, to shift the vote. You had people from Kansas retaliate by, burning stuff down, by, murdering people on the Missouri side. You had people from Missouri coming over to Lawrence, murdering people in Kansas, burning down the city of Lawrence. I mean, the houses burned down, properties damaged, people murdered on both sides. There's bad stuff and murder and stuff all over, right? Probably is good the side that Kansas was on, but still, obviously a lot of bad stuff all the way through. And so you end up with like real rivalry here that has nothing to do with sports, about families and people just hating each other because they're literally battling and attacking each other. So fast forward, we get into football. Civil War has ended, and we get to a point where we're playing college football and all these things, and these schools first meet in 1891. And I should mention too, when the series ended in 2011, which was the last year that it played, obviously Missouri goes off to the SEC afterwards. It was the second most played rivalry in Division I football history. Obviously now it's a little further down. I think it's still in the top 10 at this point in time, but that obviously pushed it back a little bit there. So 1891 is the first game. It was played on Halloween in Kansas City, and Kansas actually won the first game 22-10. So good on those 1891 Jayhawks for getting it done now. Now it's very interesting. The series record is disputed. Missouri claims to lead the series 57-54-9. Kansas claims that the series is 55-56-9. So that would mean this game, theoretically, from the Kansas side, if they could win it, they would get back to being even. The reason you might be wondering, okay, what's going on here? Like, why is this disputed? So this goes back to which I think this is just a perfect encapsulation of a rivalry, that you have this just like thing that like neither side can agree on, and so like we're just going to claim different records here, right? So you have the 1960 game is the controversial one. Kansas beat Missouri 23-7. That Missouri team. So KU actually came in ranked 11th by the Associated Press. Missouri was the number one team at the time in the AP poll in 1960. So like Missouri doesn't have any college football or have any national titles in college football. This might have been a great shot for them to be able to do it. And Kansas beat them 23-7. But the Big Eight later retroactively awarded the game to Missouri after ruling that Kansas halfback Burt Cohn was ineligible due to improper recruiting. And so Missouri counts the game as a forfeit win and claims that they get the win out of it. Kansas, meanwhile, is like, forget that, screw that, which, I don't blame them for. I wouldn't either. And so, that then you just have that kind of being different in the decades. Now, Cohen, interestingly enough, like the ineligibility, it forced Kansas to forfeit the win along with the conference title and the Orange Bowl berth, which were both awarded to Missouri in the end. And so not only did it, intensify kind of in this game, it intensified for what that meant for the rest of the conference, I guess, and making it to bowl games and stuff. It actually allowed Minnesota, too, to claim the 1960 title despite having 2 losses. So there's a bit of history there with that kind of being interesting. But, yeah, so that part's interesting. Some other big games that have happened between these schools, I think of note, 1909-10, both teams were undefeated. Missouri was 6-0-1. Kansas was 8-0. And there were 2 drop kick field goals that led Missouri to a 12-6 victory that gave them an undefeated season and a Missouri Valley title. So that was obviously a big one between those two. Then you have the 1960 meeting, obviously, that Kansas won 23-7. 1968, that's obviously the Kansas team that went to the Orange Bowl, and they beat a ranked Missouri squad that eventually went on later that year and beat Alabama with Bear Bryant in the Gator Bowl. So that was a big win for Kansas in that one. And then after that 1968 matchup, both teams, so actually 1973, we get one as well. 1973, you get both teams ranked, and Kansas beat Missouri 14-13. So they win the both ranked round in 1973. From 1973, you don't get another ranked matchup where both teams are ranked until the 2007 version. And obviously that was to the extreme. Kansas was ranked 2nd. Missouri was ranked 4th at the time. Missouri ends up winning the game 36-28. They get out to a 14-0 lead at halftime. Kansas couldn't figure things out in the first half. Second half and in the fourth quarter, Kansas starts to figure it out. They outscored Missouri 28-22 in the second half, 21-8 in the fourth quarter. But it was just too little too late for Kansas in the end. And they get down 34-28 with the ball, and they end up getting safetied But Kansas with a valiant game. Missouri ends up losing to Oklahoma in the Big 12 title. Otherwise, Missouri's playing for a national title against Ohio State, and LSU never, gets Les Miles championship, and maybe Les Miles is never the Kansas coach. Who knows what the history would be there had that not happened. But, you got a game where Chase Daniel was 40 for 49 for 361, 3 touchdowns. Todd Reesing had the 2 interceptions. That obviously hurt for Kansas a little bit there, and you lose the close games. That was a big one. Kansas obviously got a little bit of revenge the year later when they beat Missouri 40-37. Missouri would have went 10-2 with a win there. Instead, that got Kansas to 7-5. That was the game where Todd Reesing throws the deep touchdown to Kerry Meyer over the middle. Everybody can hear the Bob Davis call in their ears. Todd Reesing had 375, 4 touchdowns in that game. Desmond Briscoe, 9 for 115. Kerry Meyer, 4 for 106. Dexton Fields, 7 for 72. And Darryl Stuckey had 2 interceptions for KU. I'm sure they're using Stuckey to talk about this game coming into it. But since then, Missouri did win the last 3 before the rivalry ended, including the most recent outing. But yeah, that's a little bit on the history of Kansas, Missouri, if maybe you're not as in tune with it. And like I said, there's plenty of people who know even more about the actual history and the football history, but running out of time here. So let's get on to a little bit of how important this game is for Lance Leipold, Jalon Daniels, KU, and company. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House is the next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. Join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's promo code SHCollege5 at supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by Rougiette Ready. And with Rougiette Ready, you might be thinking, okay, what is this? Well, you might have heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. You can even read real customer reviews on their site, helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to rougiette.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get 15% off today. That's rougiette.com/lockedoncollege and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information. Thanks for joining us on Locked on Jayhawks. Don't forget to check out Locked on College Football for your second listen every day, and Locked on College Basketball for your third listen every day, because we are a little less than 2 months from that getting started. Okay, I think this is an interesting game in terms of what does this matter? What does it mean for this KU team, for Lance Leipold and Jalon Daniels? Now, I should emphasize this. Missouri is Kansas' biggest rival. We just went into why. There are real historical reasons. From that perspective, and especially in college sports, we have become too focused, I think, in college football specifically, and this is why the 14-team playoff and the 12-team playoff have kind of sucked. It has become way too focused on just making the playoff and everything else doesn't matter. And that's what kind of sucks out of all this. I don't have a problem with the playoff. The playoff itself, cool games, like dads, whatever. It's that it has become the only focus. Like, I remember we used to like grow up, and it was me growing up, and you'd have, okay, this is the national championship, and then it was a bowl selection show, and it's like, wow, this is going to be the Holiday Bowl, and this is going to be, that no longer happens anymore, right? But I could get on a pedestal and talk about that for hours. Point being, the centerpiece of college sports and things that matter is beating your rival and beating the teams that are by you regionally. And so from that perspective, this is everything, right? It's the first game we played, which was 2011, yada, yada. Obviously this game doesn't, Kansas loses. They're not firing Lance Leipold, nor should that even be a discussion, right? It doesn't change any of that. Nor does it change the successes that Jalon Daniels and this team have had. I think it's more so what a win could mean for both guys, right? Like a win for Jalon Daniels would be the kind of cementing of kind of his career at Kansas, right? Where he's done a lot of good things. There's been some lows, there's been a lot of highs, and I think this would certainly be like the thing you would remember for. I mean, obviously, everybody still, Tony Sands had a really good career at Kansas and a really good season for Kansas. So it was more than just a one game, but everybody still remembers Tony Sands for rushing for over 300 yards, or for around 300 yards against Missouri, right? That's what you get remembered for. And so yes, if Jalon Daniels has a big game and they win at Missouri, that's what people aren't going to remember anymore. Remember the first 5 games of the 2024. No, nobody's going to care. They're going to be like, hey, remember when Jalon Daniels beat Missouri and he did this, and that, right? I also think it's important because you do look, and if you're saying what is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era at Kansas? And I'm talking coming into the game, right? If we're talking about with hindsight being 2020, you would say, I don't know, Kansas beating Texas in 2021 or Kansas beating Oklahoma in 2023. You would have some games that you would point to and say, that's been the most important result, the most important game for Kansas. I don't know, whatever game you want to point to. But if we're talking about the week leading up to the game, we didn't know the Kansas-Oklahoma game was going to be as important as it was, because if you would have lost that game to what was, a top 15 Oklahoma team, you still would have ended up winning 8 games that year, If you don't beat Texas, obviously that was a springboard for KU, but coming into the week, you weren't expected to win that game, right? You were heavy underdogs in that game. If we're just talking about most important games coming into the game themselves, I think that you would probably throw the last 2 years against Kansas State up there. Maybe you'd throw, honestly, the Baylor game last year because it could have got you back to bowl eligibility. Maybe you'd throw one of those, ranked games you played last year. Maybe you'd throw one of the bowl games, the guaranteed rate bowl. Maybe you would throw the OU game or the Illinois game in 2023, getting some, I don't know, as a blackout as Friday night, getting some national publicity. Maybe you throw the TCU game from when you hosted College Game Day a couple years ago, maybe the West Virginia game, or I don't know, versus Iowa State in 2022, which was the game before College Game Day that you needed to win to, be able to host that. There's a lot of good answers there. And I will say, if I was off the top of my head, if you did want to make the argument that the K-State game from the last 2 years and the Baylor game last year that would have got you back to bowl eligibility, and the TCU game being College Game Day was here, if you want to argue that, those are 4 of the 5 or 4 of the top 6 or 7 of the most important games coming into the week before the result for Lance Leipold and KU, that is a little scary that you've lost all of them. And I can't help but think of this quote that was given by Lance Leipold. We'll get into more of the press conference, but he kind of went through the whole history of the rivalry between the states, he said, to the team. And he said that a former player could come back and speak to the team, but he mentioned that he wants KU to be an enthusiastic team, not an emotional one. He kind of talked about it as more of a process thing. And I go back and forth on that because I do get it. The best coaches in the world, they are process driven. They are not result driven. They're process driven. And to be the best team over the long haul, you do need to be process driven. But in a rivalry game, do you lose that edge by being too process driven and not letting get emotional? Now, maybe you could argue that the week after the rivalry, it would hurt you more, but Kansas is a bye week after the rivalry. And so I go back and forth on this where I'm like, is that why they keep losing to Kansas State, right? Where it's should you be more emotionally invested into this game and be like, yeah, we are process oriented, but for this week, we're emotionally oriented too. So I don't know. That'll be very interesting with the Missouri game specifically, but I think it would be a big deal for Lance Leipold from that perspective. He hasn't beat K-State yet. Who's your other rival? Missouri's your biggest rival. Go beat them, right? And obviously you'll get them at home next year, and that'll be the hope too. But, a big opportunity for, like I said, I don't think a loss here is a huge negative against Daniels and Leipold. I think it's more the opportunity of what a win would provide to their legacy from a positive perspective if they could get it done, especially on the road in Columbia. So, yeah, man, I think, a win for either guy is huge, but also for this season, it's huge too, right? I look at that Kansas State team that won the Big 12 over TCU a couple years ago and then ended up getting slaughtered by Alabama in the Sugar Bowl or whatever they were in. That team, I'm pretty sure, won at Missouri on like a long last second field goal or something. I could be wrong with that. Did Missouri actually win that game? I don't know. Whatever. Can you propel yourself with early season momentum? And you certainly would if you win this game. And it would certainly show that you're one of the best teams in the Big 12 if you do. So from that perspective, too, it's pretty important for this year. All right, Lance Leipold, some other comments. Depth chart release for week 2. We'll get to that in the latest news next. This is Locked on Jayhawks. And today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using the FanDuel app. You can even there's a little toggle that you can do now in your My Bets where you can follow the game. You can have it follow along in your lock screen on your iPhone. So, like, you know, you might be watching another game and being like, oh, what's going on over here? Well, boom, you just pull up your phone and you got the lock screen right there. So that's pretty cool. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. College football's back, and I don't know how you couldn't be more excited. I mean, the tailgating is so much fun. The rivalries, which we have this week, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But you know, sometimes getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. It's endless queues, hidden fees, price jumps at checkout. It's just kind of annoying if we're being completely honest. Well, you don't have to worry about that with Game Time because you can just toggle on the ticket fees so that you're not surprised at checkout, right? And I'm looking right now. You can get tickets for the Kansas-Missouri basketball game at the Sprint Center already on Game Time. You can get tickets for the KU football game at Missouri, where as low as $201 here is what I'm seeing. If you want to sit on the visitor section, I'm actually looking. This ain't a bad deal. Section 105, so you're right behind the KU bench, row 13 for $347. It could be a fun time to go to, and you're on the visitor side, so maybe more KU fans, maybe more faithfuls around you, right? So take the guesswork out of buying football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. Yeah, some crazy stories about this rivalry too that we didn't really have time to get into with the history, not just the games and the Civil War history and stuff, but like stories of pranks being pulled, stories of that I've heard from David Lawrence about fans. The Antlers are like the fans for Missouri, I think. And like peeing in cups and throwing them on the players from the stands. So it is pretty wild what is out there. So I am being serious. Like if you are going out for a visiting game, like have fun, enjoy, just make sure you're safe, make sure you're responsible, make sure you're not doing anything stupid. Okay. So Lance Leipold, I mentioned that earlier quote. I think that's kind of interesting. He did say that he talked to Andy Kotelnicki about Bo Pribula, Bo Pribula was the backup at Penn State under Andy Kotelnicki. He's the offense coordinator and comes over to Missouri. So we'll see if Andy Kotelnicki has anything where he's like, yeah, if he, on plays where we're trying to do this, like he wasn't able to do that, but he was really good on plays like this. I don't know if that'll be possible or help KU in any way there. He did mention, Leipold did, anticipating a LaShawn Williams return. That's good news for Kansas. Williams, the running back transfer from Iowa, looked really good in KU's game against Fresno State. Gets hurt, was kind of holding his arm, wrist, forearm, hand area. Comes off the sideline, missed the FCS game. Sounds like he's trending in the right direction. That's a big deal for KU. I do feel like Highshaw is obviously the bruiser. I don't think Williams has, Emmanuel Henderson speed, but I do think of the two, he's a little bit faster of the two. So it's nice to have kind of that compliment there. Based on some of the other comments, if I'm reading between the lines, sounds like Jack Tanner, who's not on the two deep anymore, Joseph Sipp, Bengali Kamara are probably going to be out. And then Finn Lappin, the punter, we didn't see him in the FCS game. Sounds like he's going to be kind of more questionable. Same with LaShawn Williams, though it sounds like with Williams more on the right side of the questionable. So that would be good there. Honestly, my favorite quote from the press conference was, so Devin Neal was at the game on Friday in the FCS win. And Lance Leipold said that Devin asked if he could come back and play in this game. He was like, I'll come back as a walk-on. Obviously, kind of jokingly, tongue-in-cheek there. So that was kind of funny, and you just see how much it means and matters. And see, that's somebody who, he's a Kansas kid. He's grown up with Kansas history. You understand it a little bit more. Obviously something that they're going to have to, spread to some of the non-Kansas players, though KU does seem to have more local players on their roster now than ever before. Some of the other latest news from around other programs and whatnot. I guess this is still in KU football, but Luke Grimm, he got waived by the Chargers, we mentioned, but he just got picked back up on practice squad for the Chargers. So that's good to see there that the Luke Grimm will be on the practice squad. KU volleyball has now lost 3 straight games, but it's to number 2 Penn State, number 8 Wisconsin, and number 12 Creighton, all of them on neutral field or neutral court, except for the Wisconsin game. That was a true road game. And all of them they've lost in 5 sets. So it's one of those things where it's a little frustrating when you keep losing the same way. But at the same point in time, we're so early in the season. Matt Ulmer, first year, you've got some new players in there. I think it's one of those things where you're kind of encouraged, like they could very easily have won, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of these games. The schedule is going to lighten up a little bit here with some upcoming opportunities. You'll get into Big 12 play. The hope is that you get to the end of the season and then all of a sudden you're finishing those games in the 5th set, and then you get to the NCAA tournament and you're like, yeah, we're not the same team as we were. And you meet one of those teams again in the Elite 8 or whatever, and you're like, hey, you beat us in the 5th set last time. We're more ready this time. We're taking you out. I think despite the 1-3 record, very encouraging start, I think, for KU volleyball, and just how talented and good they've looked overall. And then KU soccer, they earned a victory over Drake in their most recent outing, 3-1. That was right after they got a 1-1 draw on Thursday night at Rock Chalk Park against Florida State, who's the number 2 team in the country. So good start for KU soccer as well. 4 wins, 2 draws, and next up they've got Yale. That's going to be a road game for them on September 7th, and Liberty, and then it'll be the start of Big 12 play after that. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. We'll see you next time for another edition of Locked On Jayhawks.